There's an age at which a man should stop riding a motorbike, and I don't know what age it is, but I've clearly passed it. As a result of continuing beyond the safe age, I find myself sitting down rather than standing up. Unfortunately for you, had I been standing up, I would have lasted about 12 minutes before I'd fallen over. I can manage much longer than that sat down, so we'll see how we go. Mr. Moderator, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of our Executive Director, Mr. Yuri Fedotov, let me please pass on my thanks to the Sri Lankan Navy for organising this event and for once again including Unodc into the programme. As with everything that is organised by the Sri Lankan Navy, there's an incredible degree of attention to detail in it, and everything that we've seen and has been organised for us has been absolutely perfect. I would weight one qualification on that, and that is that the spouses programme, which I haven't come across before, I don't exactly know what it is, but it seemed to involve my hotel room filling up with bags of shopping every time my wife attends an event. I've got a text recently saying she's discovered that Sri Lanka does ceramics as well, so I think we're going to be over our luggage allowance. And it reminds me of a British politician who was recently questioned by the police and his credit card company as to why he had failed to report after 3 months that his credit card had been stolen, and he replied by saying that the thief is spending less than my wife. Anyway, to move on to more important matters perhaps, these are the issues I'm going to discuss today. Just give you a brief outline of the work that we do, but very quickly move on to the response we've given to Somali piracy, which fits into the title of this presentation, and what we're doing about heroin trafficking, which I consider is a threat to regional peace and security now, and also the work we do under the Indian Ocean Forum on Maritime Crime and the Southern Route Partnership to tackle that. Oops. Okay. As most of you are aware, the mandate of UNODC is to develop cooperation at a regional and international level and to build law enforcement capacity amongst member states. Insofar as maritime crimes are concerned, the Global Maritime Crime Programme of UNODC, which I have the good fortune to run, is entrusted to deliver that strategic vision and to strengthen maritime law enforcement capabilities. In support of this, the Global Maritime Crime Programme delivers programming in littoral states around the Indian Ocean, also in the Atlantic, and also in the Pacific. In the Indian Ocean, we have been particularly successful in stemming the threat of maritime piracy off the coast of Somalia. And we've done that through something called the Piracy Prosecution Model, which was developed as a regional solution to regional problem with the help of the regional states. So far, we've supported the prosecution of pirates detained on the high seas of the Indian Ocean in 4 countries, namely Kenya, Seychelles, Mauritius and Tanzania, with Kenya and Seychelles doing the bulk of the prosecutions. And that piracy prosecution model has been responsible for the trial of 323 suspected Somali pirates, most of whom have been convicted. This slide, which I put up now, shows the model that we follow, and basically the model uses existing judicial structures of regional states, augmented by some additional infrastructure and technical support to deliver piracy trials. And it is now generally considered to be the most effective and cost-efficient mechanism for the prosecution of this emergent maritime crime. And if we take the example of a small state like Seychelles, which has only 1 prison and a small number of courts and a handful of judges and prosecutors, in the last 5 years, Seychelles has completed 17 piracy trials and 8 appeal cases, with several more awaiting hearings. In total, Seychelles has tried 147 suspected pirates and convicted 143, although the appeal court subsequently quashed 17 of those convictions. So Seychelles has been at the forefront in developing jurisprudence on modern piracy, and the wealth of experience and depth of judges, knowledge of judges there, and also in Kenya, is unprecedented and unparalleled. The model has not only provided a legal finish, but also a deterrent mechanism that develops domestic capability. And it's important for the purpose of this presentation because it's through this process, which involves handover, investigation, trial, sentence and transfer, that we've been able to demonstrate that many of the solutions to these regional emerging crimes are to be found within the region. In those pictures you will see that the handover process is handled by Seychelles, and through the investigation and trial we provide further support. The Global Maritime Crime Programme of Unodc has provided a range of assistance in the onward transfer of those particular cases. During the period of the last 5 years, we've provided infrastructure, local capacity and invested in expertise in the region. The pictures you see there include boats that we've delivered to the Mogadishu Port Police, radars that we've installed. The central picture is a courtroom in Seychelles that we built, and on the bottom left you see a vulnerable prisoner unit also in Seychelles. So in the course of our support, we've delivered radio equipment, court recording equipment, and also provide the interpretation for the trials and make sure that the Seychelles is compensated for the cost of the defence lawyers as well. We also make sure that our training is accredited to universities and provide also bespoke training to investigate, prosecute and ensure fair and efficient trials. The establishment of this viable deterrent mechanism, together with the enhanced naval presence and onboard security measures, has contributed to a sharp decline in successful piracy cases. In fact, there have been no successful piracy attacks on a large commercial vessel for the last 3 years. That said, the threat of piracy remains. To illustrate that point, we recently conducted a survey of some 300 Somali pirates who are currently serving prison sentences in the prisons which we've built in Somalia, Kenya and Seychelles. And the lessons from that were very clear, that were the opportunity to present itself again to attack shipping, that is exactly what they would do. They come from coastal regions of Somalia where there is still an absence of law and order, where there are no alternative livelihoods, and as they complete their sentences, and all of those in Kenya will complete their sentences in the next 2 or 3 years, they will return to the same areas, and if there's nothing else for them to do, they will go back to piracy. As they say, we cannot eat sand. And that's what they will do. Now, coupled with this continued absence of rule of law in Somalia, and with the continued lack of alternatives for young men to do, we see a reduction in the use of private military security companies, an understandable reduction in the level of naval presence in the region, and we believe a reduction in the use of best management practices by shipping, with ships passing closer to Somalia. So whilst currently things are quiet, none of us should be complacent about saying that Somali piracy is finished for good. We believe that there's a need to develop a sustainable strategy to counter Somali piracy and to build strength in the coast of Somalia. And this we do by providing Somalia for the first time in 30 years with a Coast Guard capability. We've got 5 project offices around Somalia, and we're developing maritime law enforcement capability and a coastal monitoring capability. And this is exactly the sort of model for attacking an emergent maritime crime that we think can be useful in other places. I would say out of the 200-odd pirates that we've transferred back from Seychelles to Somalia, all of them are given the opportunity to consider whether they are volunteers to transfer or not. And when I last attended this process, we asked the pirates we were transferring, about 20, whether they wished to be transferred back to Somalia or not. And those who'd been captured by the Danish Navy said, well, we would rather go to Denmark if it's possible. And I said, it's not possible, you have to go back to Somalia or stay in Seychelles. And those who'd been arrested by the Dutch Navy in Kenya said, well, we would either like to go to the Netherlands or we would like to go back to or stay here. But the ones who'd been arrested by the Royal Navy were very quiet. So I asked them, why don't you want to go back to the UK in preference to going to Somalia if it were an option? And one of them said, well, my brother's serving a prison sentence in the United Kingdom for murder, and apparently the food is terrible, so we'd rather go back to Somalia. I'd like to point out that the United Kingdom has got some of the best Indian restaurants in the world. This is where the programme that I have the good fortune to run is currently working. Across it you'll see the Indian Ocean being our main area, but also work in West Africa. For the purposes of completion, I would say that in West Africa we're very active on delivering counter-piracy laws, Togo having enacted a law recently which we drafted with them. And in the next few months we expect to see several more African states, West African states, enact piracy legislation which we have helped them to develop. In West Africa we've also developed a maritime domain awareness capability which uses satellite imagery to better understand the patterns of life at sea, not only for piracy reasons but also to address illegal fishing, which, as somebody commented earlier today, was of course one of the triggers for Somali piracy. We also have maritime training teams in Sao Tome and Principe and in Ghana. And we're also now starting to work in the Caribbean along the same lines. Although we're not in all areas of the world, we have developed a very strong skill set and really unparalleled in other organisations in terms of being able to deliver global assistance in the area of maritime crime. We support the criminal justice system from the point of initial investigation by providing interpreters, supporting evidence exploitation and training on evidence collection techniques, and we also provide training for prosecutors, judges, fund the interpreters at trial, and also provide video conferencing to allow naval witnesses, for example, to give evidence at piracy trials in East Africa by video link without the need to travel. We've transferred, as I said, many pirates back to Somalia to serve their prison sentences, and that is a model we're using for other crimes, other maritime crimes too, that although individuals may be convicted in countries other than their own, wherever possible, they should be transferred back to their own countries to serve their prison sentences. We provided prison conditions in Somalia in some extremely difficult circumstances, and apart from one individual who escaped, the rest of those who've been transferred continue to serve their prison sentences. There's a tradition in Somalia that if you need to go home for a period, you can arrange for another member of your family to stand in and serve part of your prison sentence. It's not a model that Unodc supports. So generally speaking, we have a very good record on making sure that the individual who was sentenced is actually the one who serves the prison sentence. The one individual who escaped lives in Ethiopia now. Somehow he's got hold of my email address and periodically emails me to remind me that he escaped from one of our prisons. But with that exception, everybody else is serving their prison sentence. As I've explained, maritime piracy is largely in retreat at the moment. However, the business model of using the seas to make a living illicitly is one that's certainly not in retreat. We've published a number of threat assessments for the Indian Ocean, including the East African part of it, and it is clear that heroin trafficking, migrant smuggling, and the trafficking in wildlife contraband are emerging as crimes, just as piracy is beginning to recede. In fact, the high seas of the Indian Ocean are probably one of the most active areas for maritime crime anywhere in the world. But most recently, it has been the trafficking of Afghan heroin that has really begun to unsettle peace and security in this region. Largely, this comes about because of the war in Syria that has made it extremely difficult to move Afghan heroin through that region, Syria and Turkey, into Europe. So now we see much greater levels, in fact doubling in a 6-month period, generally every 6-month period, into East Africa. We term this the southern route, and it involves the movement of drugs by sea from the Makran coast to East Africa and South Asia. The increase in the use of the southern route is the result of pressure on the northern routes, not only in Syria but also in Central Asia. Partly that is due to improved law enforcement too, but the constraints on the land route are definitely having an increase on the maritime route. The key attraction of the southern route for narcotics trafficking is the lack of enforcement on the high seas. Dhows are able to depart from the Makran coast or to move off the Makran coast and pick up shipments that are moved out in smaller boats, with heroin consignments to drop-off points, and those drop-off points are along the Swahili coast in East Africa, or points near Sri Lanka and Maldives in South Asia. We have the advantage of having a number of individuals held in prisons that we mentor in Seychelles and Kenya who are able to interview about this. And to show the importance of not compartmentalising maritime criminals, but to accept that they will move from one area to the other, I will use the example of an Iranian national currently held in a prison in Seychelles. He became known to us for the first time some years ago when he was held by Somali pirates for 2 years, and we were able to assist with his release and repatriation back to Iran. Subsequently, he was arrested off Bosaso for illegally fishing and moving firearms, and served a period of 2 years in a prison, 6 months in a prison in Bosaso, which is a prison that Unodc had built, and we saw him there. He was subsequently released after the end of his sentence, and he went back to Iran. He was stopped once by the Australian Navy and his cargo of heroin confiscated, a second time by another Navy and his cargo of heroin confiscated, and then on the third occasion he was caught by the Seychelles Coast Guard, who, because he was in their territorial seas, were able to prosecute him. And now he's serving a long prison sentence in Seychelles, in another prison that we built. He's in a unique position to tell us many things, not only the relative quality of UNODC's prisons in East Africa, which he's becoming an expert on, but he also told us this, which I think is an important point, that in his vessel, the precious asset from the point of view of the drugs traffickers is him, that there are very few dhow captains who are prepared and skilled enough to do this work, that the replacement of the heroin is no big deal, that he was able to go back very quickly and get more heroin to do another route, and that the confiscation of the dhow, whilst a serious impediment for the owners, can also be replaced. But actually, it's prosecuting the individuals, the captains, that probably has the biggest impact on the business model, rather than the disposing of heroin into the sea. A useful point if you're looking for the centre of gravity of heroin traffickers in the Indian Ocean. That said, there have been substantial successes amongst the combined maritime forces. You've got no chance of reading that, I'm afraid, which would make you wonder why I put it up. But what I would say is that the combined maritime forces, and as a fiercely competitive nation, I know the Australians will want to be identified as the leading detainers of heroin in this area. Some 9,000 kilos of heroin have been contained in the last 3 years alone in the Indian Ocean, which is absolutely huge quantity of heroin. And for UNODC, who are quite experienced extrapolating what that means in terms of heroin being consumed in coastal areas, I can tell you that it completely gives an explanation for the increase in hepatitis and HIV in coastal areas of East Africa. Whilst these are impressive figures for heroin detention, and here are some pictures of CMF's work and the locations of some of their interdictions, it is estimated that now that 30 or 40% of the total Afghan heroin production is now trafficked on this southern route. At this point, I would like to also commend the work of the Sri Lanka Navy and the Police Narcotics Bureau for the interdiction of dhow trafficked heroin, some 100 kilos in March of this year. It's a most impressive figure, and also the authorities in Maldives, which have had success as well. This slide gives an indication of the effect of weather conditions on trafficking, and shows also the need to work to monitor our work to make sure that our best efforts are given at the time that the greatest effect can be had. In terms of how we tackle this, we're tackling it through the Indian Ocean Forum on Maritime Crime, which brings together 22 regional states. This will be my last slide, but I would say this. Although we tackle maritime crime through a different body to the other ones that you've heard about, please be assured that this isn't a duplication of the work of the Indian Ocean Rim Association or the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. This is very much a law enforcement effort, and will continue to be so. So thank you very much indeed for your time.